Thank you very much for that introduction. And it's a real privilege for me to be able to join you for your 100th celebration. And I bring greetings and congratulations from the Christian Medical Fellowship here in the UK. The Finnish Christian Medical Society is one of the most senior of medical societies in the world, the longest lasting. So it's a privilege for me to be part of these celebrations. So the topic you've asked me to talk about is a very challenging and difficult area. And I will raise a whole number of questions and issues, but I will not be able to answer them all. And indeed, in many areas, I don't think there are any clear answers at the moment. But I think it's important for us at least to think about these challenging questions. And there will be an opportunity for us to just discuss together some of the issues that you would like at the end of my talk. So historically, Christian ethics in healthcare has often been concerned about the destruction of life, the taking of life. If we think about issues like abortion and infanticide and euthanasia, assisted suicide, these are all concerned with the destruction, the taking of human life. But what we are now facing, and of course, those old challenges which have been around for 2,000 years are still very real, major issues which we are all facing. They haven't gone away, but we are now facing a whole selection of new challenges. And I apologize if this is a bit slick, but it's one way of thinking about it is the making, the shaping, and the faking of human life. And so we think about genetics and reproductive technology. Under the making, we think about neurotechnology, smart drugs, and different enhancement technologies. Under the shaping, the manipulation of human life, and then AI and robotics, and the merging between the humans and machines. So we are all aware of the extraordinary power of the new genetics, particularly using CRISPR technology. It's now possible to do extremely precise editing and replacement on human DNA. And the potential implications of this, of course, are still just being worked out, bringing many, many positive benefits. I just saw a news item about a patient, an adult with sickle cell disease who had received gene therapy just to replace the single base pair in his marrow cells, and the extraordinary advance this was. The genetics is also very significant at the beginning of life, and it's now possible to obtain detailed information about the fetal DNA just from a blood sample taken from the mother. And it has already, for some time, been possible to sequence the entire fetal genome just from a blood test from the mother. And I think this kind of technology may well have significant implications for the future. And the idea of predictive genetics, of the ability to use sophisticated technology and artificial intelligence to analyze an entire genome and then predict the likely phenotype from that genome. This is extraordinarily powerful technology, and quite a distinguished law professor in the US argued that within the next 20 to 40 years, it is likely that the majority of babies in developed countries will be conceived in IVF clinics and receive whole genome sequencing as embryos, before being selected for transfer to a womb. Now, I think that's amazingly over-optimistic, but nonetheless, I think that idea that we can control the genetics of our children by generating large numbers of embryos in the lab and then doing genetic sequencing on each of them and selecting the optimum embryo, I think that idea is definitely around and will likely become more widely applied. And of course, we know other extraordinary things, such as using frozen eggs. And this was a case reported some years ago of a girl who died tragically quite young, but eggs had been taken from her. She had stored her frozen eggs, and the mother of the girl who died was then implanted with these fertilized embryos. So she became both the mother and the grandmother at the same time. This is the use of technology to create so-called 3-person babies, particularly used for mitochondrial abnormalities. In the UK, we're now having a very active discussion about extending the existing 14-day limit on creating embryos in the lab to 28 days, because scientists say this will give many advantages. And this just shows again how this technology and the possibilities are just constantly being extended. The possibility of genetically modifying embryos, the technology is all there. And at the moment, this is being restricted for ethical reasons. But I think it's very likely there will be increasing pressure to allow genetic modification of embryos in order to treat underlying diseases, genetic abnormalities. So moving away from genetics, again, we're seeing remarkable changes in neuroscience, the ability to monitor the brain, including even using artificial intelligence to detect and understand what people are thinking about, but also implanting electrodes for deep brain stimulation. Here we can see the electrodes here that have been implanted in a patient who had a motor abnormality, a dyskinetic motor problem, which responded to indwelling electrodes. The treatment has also been for depression and mental health disorders, but it's also, of course, possible to use brain stimulation for enhancement. This is transcranial magnetic stimulation. It's already being promoted as a means of performance enhancement. And of course, the same idea can be used pharmacologically. It's apparently relatively common in academic circles for students and academics to take cognitive enhancement therapy, such as modafinil. Whether it actually works or not is debatable, but it shows you the next generation of pharmacological compounds may well be much more effective, and it just shows you the demand for cognitive enhancement. And then, of course, there is the whole question of the rise of artificial intelligence. And what's fascinating to me is that there is increasing now of science fiction narratives about the rise of super intelligent machines and the risk to humanity that come from that. And what is apparent is that many of the tech entrepreneurs, particularly in the USA, have been reared from childhood reading science fiction, and they've imbibed and assimilated these science fiction narratives. And one of the very frequent narratives, of course, in American science fiction is this dystopic view that as machines become more and more intelligent, that ultimately they will supersede and take over humanity, and they may even destroy humanity. And Elon Musk has said quite openly that he's been very influenced by science fiction. And so it's not surprising that Elon Musk has this dystopic fears about what will happen to humanity. And he says, and other people are saying, that unless we learn how to link up with the machines as human beings, we're going to become irrelevant. These super intelligent machines will completely surpass our own human abilities. And so the science fiction concept that we'll somehow find a way of attaching our brains to computers is now becoming a reality. It's again interesting that this science fiction idea, one American writer, British writer, Ian M. Banks, wrote a whole series of science fiction novels in the distant future, in which artificial intelligence has become so advanced that it controls most of the galaxy. But human beings have implanted what he called neural lace. It's implanted under the skull, attached to the brain, and that allows human beings to communicate directly with the machines. And Elon Musk has actually created a company called Neuralink, which has exactly this idea to make the science fiction come true. A fully implantable, cosmetically invisible brain-computer interface to let you control a computer or mobile device anywhere you go. Micron-scale threads would be inserted into areas of the brain that control movements. But there's a very dark area to this kind of technology as well, and that is in the military applications. And in fact, it's now clear that many advanced militaries around the world are actively researching how to connect the human brain to AI systems. The US military researchers have been quite open about the fact they're researching this, as have some other militaries. Even in the UK, we've had a similar, this is the UK military, has launched a new innovation focus area to find generation after next human augmentation technologies for use in defense and security. And so you get this, again, very dark idea of enhanced soldiers who are directly linked into scanners and missile systems and so on. And the race is on across the world to try and make sure that our soldiers are smarter than their soldiers. And this reminds me of the prescient words by C.S. Lewis. He was writing back in the just after the Second World War in a book, The Abolition of Man. He says, man's power over nature turns out to be power exerted by some men over other men. And so this concept of instrumentalization, that what technology does is it gives power to the strong, but in the process, the weak human beings are being instrumentalized and manipulated for the purposes of the controllers. This is another bizarre idea, which is now actually being actively pursued, and this is called moral enhancement technology. So it's already been shown that if you spray a hormone such as oxytocin into the room, so it's absorbed through the nasal mucosa, you can show that people become less aggressive temporarily. They become less aggressive and they become more pro-social. They become more collaborative. And so people are saying, you know, why can't we find more sophisticated drugs or other techniques which actually create a better morality of human beings. And I think, again, it's an obvious technological solution. As we look across the world, we see so much hatred, we see so much violence, aggression. Isn't there a technological solution? And the other slightly scary thing is that some philosophers who are talking about this have said, if this technology becomes available, then we can guarantee that the people who really need this moral enhancement are the ones who will refuse to have it. And therefore, if moral enhancement technology is going to be successful, it must be compulsory. We must ensure that every single person, whether they like it or not, receives moral enhancement. It cannot be a voluntary thing. And then there is, again, artificial intelligence and this extraordinary runaway advances that we're now seeing in many different fields. This is artificial intelligence being used for monitoring. And in many Western countries, as well as in China, this very sophisticated technology is being used not only for analyzing facial recognition, but also gait analysis and other sophisticated forms of analysis in order to monitor and detect, monitor every single person in a population. And in China, of course, this is being used primarily for social control and to ensure that the Communist Party in China remains in control. This is also being used by police and military to detect, in the West, to detect security risks, but also, of course, it has huge commercial potential. And as we all know, ChatGPT, a recent breakthrough, this is generally, the term is large language models, a fascinating new and very powerful kind of technology, which I'm experimenting with myself with due caution. But this shows the take-up of ChatGPT when it was announced and released into the wild, compared with other new and popular internet programs. It just shows the speed with which this was taken up. And also, this is now a massive investment area. In fact, these figures are already out of date, and the latest figures suggesting even more investment into this area. So artificial intelligence is seen as having immense commercial implications. And of course, it's going to have many, many applications in healthcare. It's already coming in, but I think we haven't seen anything yet in terms of the very positive applications of AI in many different areas: diagnosis, medical imaging, data analysis, drug discovery, health records, clinical trials, and so on. But I think it's also important to see the downside of this. As the machines get more and more impressive, there's a very noticeable trend for many technological thinkers to express a kind of disappointment or even a disgust in their own human embodiment. And this is a trend I spot more and more, and I recommend it to you to look out for this sort of comparison between how wonderful the machines are on one hand and how pathetic and useless human beings are. We're pathetic, ludicrous, laughable bipeds. We've got these reptile brains. We're only fit for survival on the African savannah. We're completely ill-suited to the modern world. And there's a kind of constant undertone of denigration of humanity. And these kind of popular neuroscience, the idiot brain, we've got the reptilian brain in the center, then you've got the limbic system, which is supposed to be mammalian brain, all about emotions. And then you've got the neocortex with logic and abstract thought. And I mean, in reality, neuroscientists say this is massively oversimplified and really ridiculously unhelpful. But it's become a kind of orthodoxy about how the brain works, and in particular how utterly irrational and illogical and generally useless the human brain is. Of course, there's a terrible logical problem with all this, because who wrote this book, The Idiot Brain? Oh, of course, it was a human being who's got his own idiot brain. So therefore, if it really is true that the brain is as useless as the neuroscientists say it is, then by definition, their neuroscience must be completely unreliable. In other words, you can't trust anything that a neuroscientist ever says, because he's told us how useless brains are. So neuroscientists play this curious trick whereby they say, well, everyone else's brain, it operates in illogical and irrational and emotional. But my brain, of course, my brain is working incredibly well, because I'm able to understand how everyone else's brain is useless. And that is, I'm afraid, it just doesn't work. There's a profound logical inconsistency here. Going back to artificial intelligence, one of the fascinating things is that there appears to be no physical limit to the potential processing power of computers and information technology. So whenever one is talking about other kinds of technology, like, how big an engine can be, how big a rocket can be, how big a building can be, how fast something can operate, there are always physical limits which limit how advanced and powerful the technology can be. But it seems that when you're dealing with ones and zeros, as in information technology, there is no theoretical limit as to how powerful things can be. And this has led to serious alarm among many thinkers. So what they say is, what is unique about human beings? Well, it's our intelligence. Compared to any other species on the planet, we are the most intelligent. And so people plot this intelligent axis. This is actually taken from a serious book by an Oxford professor, Nick Bostrom, called Superintelligence. And so here you can see the intelligence of a mouse. This is the intelligence of a chimpanzee. And this is the span of human intelligence. So this is the least intelligent human being, so-called village idiot. And here is the most intelligent possible person, a human being, is Einstein. And so the entire span of human intelligence is in this range here. And then the people say, well, what happens when this happens? So a super intelligent AI appears, but it's so far out of front of us. It's the gulf between this and Einstein is greater than the gulf between Einstein and the mouse. And so the question comes, well, do we think that this super intelligent AI is going to be particularly helpful and careful about the interests of human beings? Or is it going to regard us much like we think of a mouse or an insect of no real significance? And that means this concern has led to a lot of this dystopic fear about the existential threat to the human race from a super intelligent AI. And this is why Elon Musk and others have called for a pause on AI research, citing profound risks to society. I mean, despite this call, nothing seems to have changed, and in fact, the focus and concentration on research in AI has continued apace. I think another aspect that we're going to see more and more, and we're already seeing this, is the so-called simulated persons. We've already got this experience of Alexa and Google Home and Apple Siri, these disembodied voices that talk to us and that appear to be intelligent and friendly. Replica is an artificial intelligence program where you train your own app. You can select your unique companion. And just recently, I read a rather poignant article, because this is becoming very popular. There are millions and millions of people around the world who are already spending hours every day talking to their own unique artificial intelligence companion, particularly men. Surprise, surprise. The majority of the people who find this really helpful are single men. And I recently read a very poignant article from a young woman, saying, how can women possibly compete with these idealized artificial intelligent companions? Because you can select their body type, you can select their personality, and they're always friendly, they're always compliant, they'll talk to you however you want them to talk, and they seem so much preferable compared to the real world relationships and real women who, this is a kind of idealized view of what a companion should be like. So I think this whole question of how important is it? How important is a simulated reality compared with reality itself? And there's a US television series called Westworld, set in a science fiction future, where there's a theme park which is populated by incredibly sophisticated humanoid robots. And they're so sophisticated that you can't really tell whether the difference between a human and a robot. And the idea is that real human beings can come to this robot park and they can then live out their fantasies with all these simulated robots. And in one of the episodes, a human being arrives at the theme park for the first time, and this beautiful woman comes up to him and says, can I help you? Is there anything you would like me to do? And he stares at her and he says, are you real or are you one of those? And she says, if you can't tell, does it matter? And I think that question is one that's going to haunt us as we go into this future. If you can't tell the difference between a brilliantly sophisticated simulation and reality, if you can't tell the difference between simulated compassion, simulated love, simulated interest, does it matter? Now, I think many of us as Christians want to say, yes, it does matter. Authenticity matters. But there are many people out there who say, if you can't tell the difference, it doesn't matter. So the two fundamental questions, I think, which this advancing technology is asking are these two fundamental questions. What does it mean to be human? But the second one is just as important. What is the end goal of advancing technology? What kind of world do we wish to create for our children? So firstly, what does it mean to be human? And of course, just very briefly, one or two things. I'm very struck by not only the very well-known passage in Genesis 1 that human beings are made in God's image, but also in Genesis 2 that we are formed from the dust of the earth, but then God breathes into the man's nostrils his breath, which is, of course, is an image of the spirit, and the man became a living creature. So we are made from the dust, we are mammals, but in some unique way, compared to all the other human creatures that God makes, only human beings are breathed in this intimate way. It's a beautiful picture, almost like a kiss. God creates this being from dust and then breathes into his nostrils. Have you ever thought that in the upper room, in the resurrection appearances, when Jesus comes to the disciples, he says, as the Father has sent me, I am sending you. And then he breathes on them. He says, receive the Holy Spirit. Or in the Greek, it's actually receive the holy breath. And I think that is a is a link back to this, that as we are filled with the Spirit from Jesus, we are the new humanity inbreathed by the Spirit. And I think the other thing which is very unique about human beings, and that is that we are persons. Personhood is actually a Christian concept. It's a theological concept, and it comes historically, it comes from the idea of the Trinity, that as the church fathers tried to understand what the Bible said about the Trinity, they concluded that God was one being in three persons. And so personhood is a category of reality which, to use philosophical terms, it's ontologically foundational. You cannot define a person in any more primary way. To be a person is to reflect the persons of the Trinity. And persons are constituted by their relations. So the very being of the Father depends on the existence of the Son. Otherwise, he could not be Father if the Son did not exist. And similarly, the Son cannot be Son unless the Father exists. So the very being of the persons are constituted by their relations, by the movement of communion, by the self-giving of the persons to the other. And the idea is that as human persons, we too are constituted by our relations. We give to one another. So to be a person is to participate in some sense, like with the life of the triune God. And so whereas Descartes said, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am, in this kind of Trinitarian way of thinking, you love me, therefore I am. Our being doesn't come from our cogitation, it comes from the fact that we are in relation with others, and ultimately we're loved by God. So if you apply personhood onto this into this diagram, you realize that the personhood dimension is not the same as the intelligence dimension, because both the village idiot and Einstein, even though they have a big difference in intelligence, we would understand they're both equally persons. They're both persons made in God's image, constituted by their relations. Whereas this super intelligent machine cannot be a person because it's a construct. It's a human construct. The historic Christian faith makes the claim that Jesus was raised from death as a recognizable, touchable human being. And so in this way, God has said the final yes to the original model human person. He said that this kind of embodied physical humanity is fit to be transformed. It will become renewed and part of the new heaven and earth. So there is a dignity about the human frame, Homo sapiens, not just because of where we come from, the way we were created, but what our ultimate destiny is, to be like Jesus. And so I think it's helpful to think of human beings as flawed masterpieces. I haven't time to unpack this now, but perhaps we can come back to that. The idea that we can use technology to restore the masterpiece. This is an original masterpiece by Holbein in the National Gallery here in London. We can use technology to restore the masterpiece, but we're not free to change the design. And so if human beings are like flawed masterpieces, then it's ethical to use advanced technology to restore the masterpiece according to the artist's original intention. We're not free to change the design. And then finally, as I close, what is the ultimate goal of advancing technology? What is the telos? What are we aiming to achieve? What is the end game? What kind of world do we wish to create for our children? So when the technologists create a vision of the future, this kind of science fiction future or the city of the future, it creates a vision of a future in which every aspect of life becomes frictionless. Every desire, every longing, every interest is going to be satisfied instantly, effortlessly in this new digital world. Frustration, struggle, boredom will all go away. Instead, we'll just be free to fulfill our wildest dreams with the minimum of effort. But is this a future in which physically embodied human beings can flourish and find our ultimate purpose and fulfillment? Because if you think about your own life and if you think about other people's lives, what it seems is in order to develop, in order to mature and flourish, we need resistance, friction, struggle, perseverance, frustration, resilience, pain, suffering. The Disney film WALL-E is set in the future where the planet has been destroyed by human destruction, and greed, and humanity has moved into space, into these spaceships. And the robots run the spaceships, and what human beings do is they sit on their backsides, they become morbidly obese, and they stare at screens all day long. And it's a kind of terrible, humorous but dystopic picture of what humanity might become in a frictionless future. Is this the kind of future we want for our children? So the question is, how can this powerful technology be redeemed? How can it be brought back from evil possibilities and used to fulfill its amazing potential to promote human flourishing, the common good, and the good of creation? So just as I close, how do we respond to all this? Well, I would call it critical vigilance. We need to try to understand the signs of the times. God has put us on the planet at this particular extraordinary time of technological development. Second, there's an urgent need for education and information, particularly for young people, for church leaders, to educate them on these topics. And we need to support and resource workers and researchers in the tech industry and in biomedical research, because many of these are Christian believers. And we need to find opportunities for co-belligerence, working together with other people of goodwill to ensure that the technology is used for good and not for evil. And then finally, I'm struck by how often when God comes into the world, often in a very threatening and dangerous time, one of the first things he says in the Bible time and again is, don't be afraid. So we can be confident that God's sovereign purposes are being worked out in history in surprising and unexpected ways. And we're all called to be tiny players, bit players in the great drama that God has written and that God is working out. So I'll finish there. These are the books to do particularly with biomedical ethics. This is a book on artificial intelligence and the robot. We'll see you now. And just literally this week, a new book has been published that I've written called Transforming Friendship, something completely different. And I have a website where you could find more information about these, many of these issues, johnwyatt.com. Thanks very much. I'll stop there.